You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 84. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I am so glad to have you here. This is the last episode of 2022. It is the first full year that this episode has been alive. It was conceived back in 2021. I can't believe we're at 84 episodes. And as I record this, it is the shortest day of the year. It's Wednesday, December 21st, the winter solstice. I don't know about you, but I think this may be one of my favorite days in the year. I learned about the winter solstice from my grandmother, who lived to be almost 100 years old. And I just remember her saying to me one year, Paula, this is the shortest day of the year. And every day after this gets longer. And for some reason, it just felt so comforting. And I was so happy to have this idea that the days were getting longer, that we'd kind of reached the deepest part of winter and the light was coming back. So whenever we reach this day, this year it's the 21st, sometimes it's the 22nd, I just feel so happy knowing that the days are getting longer, that when I go to pick up my kids from school or after school care, it's going to be brighter, that spring is around the corner. Amazing. And I think it also coincides with a theme. And last week I spoke about resolutions on the podcast. And this year I'm talking about 2023, about the new year. To me, this really is a time of renewal. Now, I will pause and say I think September is also a big time for me. I feel like September is when we go back to school. So some of my goal setting actually takes place at that time of year. But there's nothing like January 1st that signifies a clean slate, an opportunity for new. I pick a word of the year, or at least I have for the last few years. So I've done that. I'm all excited to bring that goal to fruition, or that word to fruition. And I wanted to talk to all of you about something that's been on my mind, which is the role of courage. So today we're going to do a little reflecting, because I think when we wrap up a year, it's pretty important to look back and appreciate all the things that we have done over the course of the year. We're going to talk about 2023 and what that has in store for you in particular. And we're going to talk about courage. So before we do that, I just wanted to share with you some of the reflections that I've had on my own year. I think that 2022 has been a pretty incredible year. It has been a year that has been full of opportunities and surprises, a lot of things that I never could have anticipated or predicted. I have been blessed with opportunities to work with lawyers, whether they come to me independently or whether they have come to me sponsored through their law firms, whether it's coaching in a one-to-one capacity or if it's speaking and training. All of these opportunities I feel so joyful about them. I feel so inspired. I feel connected, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've had this year to really grow and develop in my practice as a coach. I have continued to produce this podcast, 52 episodes, one every week. And what I have found to be most rewarding, I think there are two real highlights. One of them is you as a listener, knowing that you are tuning in. And I I know that I don't hear from most of you, that you listen to the podcast and that it's not something that you necessarily check back with me about, which is fine. You don't have to. But I do receive emails or messages from you, and you tell me about the impact that this podcast has had on you, whether it has been to help you through a difficult negotiation that you were having, something that happened at work where you found comfort in one of the episodes, whether you were inspired by one of the speakers, one of the guests that came on the podcast. And it means so very much to me. You have no idea how much I love seeing your name in my inbox, how much I just love hearing that it has impacted you. It truly is the most rewarding part of doing these podcasts. The other part, which is, it might actually be as rewarding, it's really neck and neck, I'd have to give it some more thought, is the relationships with the guests that have come on this podcast. And if you've listened to the podcast episodes where I've had a guest on, you will know that the guests that I've brought on are incredible. The women who have spoken, who have shared their stories, who have shared their expertise, they are incredible. And the energy that comes from those conversations is just, it's not something I can really put into words. And I just wanted to extend a thank you to all of you who tune in to listen. And if you're one of my guests that has come on in the past, thank you for joining. It has just been remarkable to have you on and for you to share your story, because your stories are what inspire others, what show others what is possible, what you can do with your law degree, different ways you can practice law, different forms of support you can have in your practice. And all of that just means the world to me. So thank you. 2022 has been a year where I've really enjoyed this podcast. Other things that I've enjoyed this year are things that happen behind the scenes. I may have spoken about them a little bit, but for me, it's my ongoing learning. So as you know, I'm a coach. I talk about that a lot. And this year, next year, my ICF credentials are up for renewal. And so I've been focused on getting some additional ICF certified training. And in part of that, I've been taking a course that is specializing in ADHD coaching. And the reason I picked ADHD coaching is because it's something that comes up in my practice where lawyers share with me that they have been diagnosed with ADHD. And so my work with them is done in a way that supports them. And in particular, I see it coming up in practice management. And there it really is a question of understanding our brains, understanding the executive functioning skills that we all have, whether or not you have ADHD. And I have loved being in this community where I'm learning how to better understand my own brain, frankly. I think for all of us, learning how to break down executive function, and I will talk about this in future podcast episodes because I think it's beneficial for everybody. But doing that deep dive, learning some new coaching skills, meeting other fellow coaches who are in a similar space has been so gratifying. And I also continue to do my own work with coaches. I have coaches that I work with. I'm part of a mastermind that will be wrapping up early in the new year. Having that additional support has been so impactful for me in my practice. So when I look back at 2022 from a professional standpoint, it has been a very busy year. It has been a very engaged year. I have learned a lot. I have loved the work that I'm doing. And I just wanted to share that with you because it's because of you that I'm able to do this work. And I want to thank you. I want to extend my gratitude to you and to let you know that I'm so excited to continue with this work and to continue to build my practice next year. In April of next year, it will be 5 years since I became certified as an executive coach. And I can't believe it has gone by that quickly. And I imagine when you look at your practice and where you are now, where you're going to be next year, that you too are maturing in your practice. If you think about the opportunities that are coming your way as a result of the work that you've been putting in, it's just such a rewarding feeling. So in addition to some of the, we will call them wins or things that I look back on and I'm really proud and excited, there's also been some great learning opportunities. And I shouldn't say that in a way that I'm not proud of those learning opportunities as well. I am. I'm proud of all of it. There have been things that I've done this year where I think, okay, that's a learning opportunity for next year, for the future, Paula. Some of the learning, I think patience is one of them. I think learning to be more patient with myself and sometimes more patient with others is an area where I have grown. And I also see that there's opportunity for me to grow even more. There is pacing myself. This is an area where I know you can very likely relate. I love having a full plate. I love it so much that sometimes my plate gets a little more full than is comfortable. And what that means is that sometimes I can teeter on the brink of burnout. Now, what is good is that I'm able to catch myself. For example, right now, as we head into the holidays, I can tell just the way I feel. I can tell just my health feels a little bit off. And for me, that doesn't mean that I'm not at the risk of burning out, but I am at the risk of getting there if I don't course correct. And we're about to step into a holiday, so I am planning some time off. And part of what I'll be doing before we enter the next year is giving myself that space to really plan for the new year. I have a number of commitments coming up. I'm super excited about them. And I also know that I need to build self-care into especially my next 6 months, because I'm going to be demanding a lot of myself professionally. And I want to make sure that I'm also giving myself the time and the space to recharge personally. So that's some learning there for me, is being efficient with my calendar. That I don't really struggle with, but creating that time for me, creating that space to reflect and relax a little bit. Similar, balancing my love for my work and my love for my friends and family. So again, that's an area where I am continuing to tweak. I know a lot of you can relate to this, where you love the work that you're doing professionally and you love your family and you love your friends and you want to do it all and you want to do it all right now. That is an ongoing exercise where I continue to figure out the calibrations for that. And finally, and I think I've already alluded to this, is just ongoing monitoring of my physical and mental health. So just making sure that I'm giving myself the space, the nourishment, the exercise, the time outdoors. These are all things that I'm pretty good at keeping my eye on and implementing, but wanting to be really mindful of that going forward. And it's funny because the past 3 days, I have literally been, I have been sequestered pretty much full days while the kids have had their first few days off of school. My husband's been off work, so he has been doing the lion's share of all of that. And this is a pace that I have because I need to. I want to get ready for the holidays. But I also recognize that when I don't give myself that space in the day to go for a walk midday, to recharge, to not be in the output mode consistently, it does catch up with me. So for all of you, I'm sharing this because this might be something that you're also experiencing. And I think it's important for all of us to keep an eye on it and to calibrate as we move ahead to make sure that we're setting ourselves up to have the best health possible. So with that, let's talk a little bit about 2003. I've already mentioned I'm very excited. Is this really indulgent? I've been talking about myself now for about 12 minutes. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope this isn't too much, and I hope that there's something in here that you are connecting to. But I do want to do this before turning over to some of the questions that I have for you. And I just wanted to say 2023 is a year that I'm really looking forward to, particularly because of some of the opportunities that I have in my practice. So work that I'm doing with law firms, work that I'm doing with lawyers directly. And it's the first time that I'm running a group program for a group of women lawyers. I just announced it the other day. I've had some inquiries from lawyers who are interested in joining or who have joined. And I am so excited for this program. There may still be space when this episode goes live. So if it's something that it sounds like you would be interested in, by all means, please do reach out to me. I just think it's going to be magical. I cannot wait to create this container, a virtual room full of women who are all going after something that is important to them in their practice, and to have the structure, to have a theme each month, to have discussions, to be able to tap into the wealth of knowledge and experience within the group. I can't tell you how excited I am to be doing this. And so that is just something that I'm really grateful for, and I'm excited to embark on in the new year. So with that, I really want to turn today's podcast episode over to you and to think about some questions that will help you to appreciate and reflect on some of the things that you have accomplished over the past year and some of the goals that you have for yourself for 2023. So first of all, let's do some reflecting back on 2022. And here are some questions I would like you to consider. Here we are, December 2022, if you're listening to this podcast when it goes live. Maybe it's a bit later than that, and that's fine too. Wherever you are, I encourage you to reflect on these questions. If you go back a year ago today, December 21st, 2021, what was different for you back then? And think about what goals have you achieved over the course of the year. Maybe you've had a transition within your career. Maybe you've taken on a new job. Maybe you have advanced in a way within your organization that is a promotion. Maybe you've changed the nature of your work. Maybe you've brought new pieces of work into your role. Maybe you're taking on more of a leadership role. Maybe you've had some big wins at the office. Maybe you've had a closing that was really significant. Maybe you've had a trial that you worked on that you have wound up and you won on behalf of your client. Maybe you have a project that you've been working on that has come to fruition or is getting close. Here, I would invite you to think about all the goals that you had at the beginning of last year or the beginning of this year and just how far you have come. I would invite you to think about what opportunities have come to you, particularly opportunities that you may not have been able to predict. What does that look like? Well, maybe it's a client that came to you through a speaking engagement that you had that you never would have expected that this person would somehow find you. Maybe you have an opportunity at work. Maybe somebody that you work with brought a project over to you. They appreciated something that you'd done on another file and they thought you were the perfect person for that opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity to teach. Maybe it's an opportunity to speak. Maybe it's an opportunity to get involved on a board. Here, I would just like you to think about what it is that is coming your way. And it may seem like it's out of the blue. It may seem fortuitous, but I guarantee that some of those opportunities are coming to you because of the work that you're doing and the reputation that you are building for yourself. So let's take a moment to appreciate those opportunities that have come to you over the course of 2022. Another question I would love for you to reflect on is to think about some of the decisions that you've made over the course of the year. And I don't want you to brush this off too lightly. Decisions can be really challenging to make. I know because lawyers come to me with big decisions that they're making in their careers, and some of those decisions do require the weighing of a lot of information, a lot of different factors, risk factors, upsides, downsides. And when you make decisions, it allows you to move forward with speed and with clarity. It may not be easy, but once you've made that decision, you know where you want to go. So I want you to think about some of the decisions that you've made over the course of the year, especially those really tough decisions, and how it feels to be on the other side of it. I would also invite you to think about some of your bravest, proudest moments. What did you do this year that was hard? Something that you had to talk yourself into doing that maybe you felt a lot of resistance, a lot of fear, and then you did it and you felt so good having done it. Maybe not right away, but when you look back on it now, wherever you are, just reflecting, listening to this podcast, what is it that you are proud of? And let's really, truly celebrate that. Another question, what skills have you developed over the year? Think about it. Every year that you're in practice, you are honing, refining, developing the skills that you engage every day in your practice, whether they are your legal skills, the way that you conduct an examination for discovery, the way that you cross-examine a witness at trial, the way you write when you're preparing your closing submissions. It might be closing a deal, the way that you think about the structure of a deal, the way that you manage the deal so that everything flows properly and smoothly and you land exactly on the day, the time that you had anticipated. Think about the skills that are supportive of your legal skills, the ancillary skills, the way that you speak to your clients, the way that you manage their expectations, the way that you manage your time, the way that you set deadlines, the way that you delegate to members of your team. Think about all these skills that you are developing. And when you think about where you were last year, maybe you had some skills in particular that you were focused on developing this year. Just think about how far you have come in relation to each of those. Finally, I would ask you to think about what is true today that would have surprised you in December 2021. Seriously, what today is true that if I had told you a year ago that you would be listening to this podcast episode and that this would be a fact in your life, would you have said, no, Paula, you're crazy. That would never happen. Chances are there is at least one thing that you are doing right now that you never would have anticipated. And maybe it's related to one of these opportunities that you couldn't have predicted, but think about it. What is that for you? Now, you might also reflect, just like I shared with you, there were some learning opportunities from the past year. You might also ask yourself, where might you do things differently based on the experience that you had in the past year? So, for example, maybe there was an area where you exerted a lot of effort, but you didn't see a lot of results. And ask yourself, is this an area where maybe it just takes time, right? Sometimes if it's a speaking engagement, for example, if you've committed to speaking at organizations to develop your professional network and you feel like that hasn't really built a lot of momentum very quickly, maybe it's something that you need to keep doing or that you would like to keep doing, because over time it will generate the relationships that you're looking to build. Or maybe it's something that you realize, having put in the effort, that you actually don't really want to keep doing that. Maybe it is speaking. Maybe you realize, the exercise of preparing and speaking isn't really something that I love, but writing, that is something that I can really get attached to. Writing for my law firm's blog, or creating my own blog, or submitting articles to different journals or publications. Maybe that's something that you can really get behind. So I would invite you to think about, where have you exerted energy disproportionately to the return that you actually get? And maybe in the new year, it's time to let that go. Another question, what goals did not come to fruition for you this year? Now, I think I've shared on the podcast before, and probably I think it's episode 4 where I talk about fear. One of the goals that I had on my list prior to 2021 was this very podcast. I wanted to create a podcast. It was on my to-do list and it sat there for a while. Nothing happened because it was too hard. It was too much time. I didn't know where to start, etc. And so I had to make it a priority in order for that goal to actually happen. So if you look at your own practice, is there something to do that maybe was on your list last year that didn't come to fruition this year? And if so, is that something that you want to change in the new year? Is it something that you may need to prioritize, whether it is through working with a coach, whether it is through finding some other way of making yourself accountable to bring that goal to the top of your priority list? That might be an area where you want to focus a bit of time and energy this year. It may not be the right time, but I'd invite you to consider it. And then finally, are there any problems that did not get resolved? So sometimes it shows up in relationships. Sometimes it shows up in the way that you manage your practice. It's almost like this ongoing challenge. Now, I know for myself, I never feel very good at the end of December. So January usually brings some health goals with it. And my health is something that I maintain pretty regularly over the course of the year. So it's not like these goals are going from 0 to 100. But sometimes it's an ongoing problem or challenge that you need to recalibrate in the new year. And the other week, I recorded a podcast episode. It's called Problems That You Solve versus Problems That You Manage. And if you haven't listened to it, I would recommend going back and listening to it. It's a really neat concept, and I find it quite liberating. But the reason that I'm mentioning it now is in relation to how you approach the new year. You may look at problems as some that you want to solve and some that you want to manage, and that management of the problem may turn out to be one of the goals that you have for the new year. So for example, if you have a colleague or a client who's really difficult for you to get along with, the goal may not be that you somehow magically become best friends with that person, but your goal might be, how do I manage that relationship so that I create the ultimate outcome for what that relationship is for? So if it's a working relationship, you have the best working relationship that you can have with that person while minimizing the cost to you. So if right now you find that you're very frustrated by that relationship, maybe you spend a lot of mental space, mental energy trying to figure out how to make it better, how it's not fair, how it needs to change, etc. If you can find a way to manage that relationship and then free up your mental space so you're no longer thinking about it, that might be a real win for you. So these are just areas where you might think of moving forward, how you might want to tweak things in your practice. So that's step one, is thinking about 2022, what we can celebrate and what we can learn from it. Now, the next thing that I would love for you to consider, love, is to look out to this glorious expanse of time known as 2023. We have 365 days ahead of us that can be used to create whatever you want. It's that blank slate. And I love I really do love it. As I'm talking about it, I'm really excited. And bear in mind, I'm looking out at this beautiful snowy landscape. It very rarely snows like this in Vancouver, but right now I'm looking at snowy rooftops. It's a clear blue sky kind of day. And so when I think of those 365 days right now, it's like a blank sheet of paper and it's just waiting to be written on. So if you have that blank sheet of paper in front of you and you're thinking about 2023, what do you want to put on there? What energizes you? What goals do you have? What would absolutely be a magical experience for you? As I'm doing this exercise mentally in my mind right now, I can tell you one of the most magical things that I'm looking forward to creating next year is community. I want to continue to build community. To me, it is not just the connection and the magic that happens when brilliant minds come together and join forces and create magical things. It is the ongoing effect. It is the benefit, is the legacy that is created by each of those brilliant minds. So if you go back to the podcast episode that I recorded about legacy, and we will link to that in the show notes, it's not just about me. It's not just about you. It's not just about the impact that you have in your work. It's about all those people that are impacted by you, whether it's your clients, whether it's the family of your clients, whether it's your family, whether it's what members of your family go on to create. It's you as an example for other women lawyers who are out there who see in you something that they want to have for themselves. All of that is creating an impact. And that is what gets me really, really fired up and really excited to go out and do the work that I want to do in the world. And I have a lot of projects and ambitions and goals for next year. But the goal that is at the top of all of those is a goal that is based on community. Because to me, that is my biggest stretch goal. That's where I really have to grow as a human, as a professional, to be able to create that space to bring people together. It doesn't happen without me finding ways to do that. And that to me is one of the most challenging and inspiring ways or goals that I have moving into 2023. So for each of you, I would invite you to think about what you want to create in 2023. What is one really overarching goal, one overarching theme that for you requires for you to grow, that requires for you to stretch yourself, where at the end of the year, you are going to be so proud of yourself for having done it. And if you're looking for some ideas, here are some ways that I have seen some of my clients approach goals or challenges or opportunities in their practice. So sometimes it's a job transition, right? It's looking at joining a new firm or starting your own firm or leaving where you are now and joining a different organization. It might be within the place you are becoming a partner or getting promoted or taking a role that is different from the one that you have currently. For some of you, it might be making a decision to leave the practice of law. And that is a tough decision. It's a decision that I made a few years back. It's one that I support lawyers through who want to make that transition. But that might be something that you've been thinking about, that maybe this is the year that you want to make it happen. You might have goals related to productivity. whether they're income goals, whether they're goals in terms of your targets, whether you want to generate more work, you want to develop new client relationships, maybe new relationships within your professional network, lawyers that you work with, other professionals that you work with. You may be looking at building your profile, maybe doing some branding. I know that word doesn't resonate with everybody. I have a podcast episode about creating a brand. I think what's most important about a brand is that it is an extension of your self-concept as a professional. And to the extent that you get to be intentional about that, I would encourage you to think about what you want that to be, right? And to me, that means showing up with integrity. It means showing up in a way that is in service to the needs and goals of your clients. It is honesty. It is trustworthiness. So think about what it is that you might want to create for yourself in terms of really coming into professional maturity, really defining yourself as a lawyer, as a professional, and envisioning what that is and how you're going to embody that in the new year. It may also be that part of your productivity goals involve expanding the type of services that you're offering as a lawyer. Maybe it's branching into a new practice area. Maybe it's providing services in a new way. Other goals you might have for yourself: practice management. This is one where I love helping lawyers with this. So if you're looking at having greater productivity in your days, scheduling more efficiently, feeling more in control of your practice, feeling like you're better able to use the time that you spend at work accomplishing the tasks that you have at work, that is also something that you might have as your goal. And if that is something that you would like some help with, please do reach out. It is one of the ways in which I really love supporting lawyers. And I feel like my ability to support you is only getting greater as I do more of this work with lawyers and as I take additional training for myself. And then finally, your goals might be more in the nature of personal management. So by that, what I mean is building your confidence, building your leadership skills, maybe finding a way to cope better with the stress of practice. Maybe it's setting boundaries more easily with greater confidence. Maybe it's being able to ask for help, to rely on support so that you're not doing everything on your own. And maybe it's finding a way to push your own health up the priority list. So think about that. Think about these topics and ask yourself, what is something that you would absolutely love to have in the new year? And if you'd like some ideas on how you can accomplish that, I would refer back to last week's podcast episode where I talk about creating sustainable success. And you might find that that episode helps you in achieving what it is that you want for 2023. Now, finally, before we part ways for the year, what I would love to tie this whole conversation back to is courage. If you are a long-time listener, and I can say that now because I think we've been doing this for a while. It's been about 1.5 years. If you have been listening to this podcast, then you know that courage is a theme that I come back to often. When I talk to my guests, for example, often they have stories where there's been a moment where they've needed to exert great courage to make a decision, to make a move that felt really scary at the time. And it is often the result of that decision that has them speaking about it. So if I think, for example, of Annette Chody, who is a digital marketer, in our interview, she talked about this moment in time where she transitioned from lawyer to solo practitioner in the marketing sphere. And she describes taking a leap of faith. And to me, that was a moment of courage that led her down a completely different path. And we found each other because of the work that she does now. So I would invite you to think about courage as it relates to the decisions that you are making. And also, sorry, I just realized part of what I'm trying to say here is that courage is a running theme, not only in the guests that have come onto the podcast, but also in terms of how you as a listener to the podcast is applying some of the skills and the lessons and the ideas that we talk about in the podcast. So sometimes it's overcoming a challenge. And part of that might mean that you step into discomfort, and that requires courage to take action, right? If you are setting a boundary with somebody and it's new to you and it feels scary and unfamiliar, that is an act of courage. And so for the next year, for 2023, if you look at how courage is informing the decisions that you're making going forward, what could be possible for you if you stepped into your full courage in the decisions that you make, in the conversations that you have, in your relationships with others, and the relationship that you have with yourself? So if we define courage, there's a definition that I took off the internet, Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, and I think it's a really good definition. That's why I picked it. Mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. And I'm going to break it down a little bit, because what they're saying is that courage is strength. It is the mental or moral strength that allows you to do something. And the do here, the words that are being used in this definition are venture, persevere, and withstand. So the courage is that strength that allows you to do something, right? Persevere, commit. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's initiating action on a goal. But it is the do. And what you're overcoming are danger, fear, or difficulty. So you are using your strength to willingly put yourself in a position where you may feel danger, fear, or difficulty. So I love this definition because what it signals to me is that courage is something that you do, or it's something that you have that allows you to do an action. It's persevering, it's venturing, it's withstanding things that may feel really uncomfortable for you. And I think sometimes we confuse courage with fearlessness. I do not think that courage is the absence of fear. I think courage is allowing the fear to be there and doing it anyways. And there is a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways. I own that book. I've read that book. It's Susan Jeffers. It's an excellent book. It is exactly that. It's knowing that you're going to feel discomfort, but it's not going to stop you from going after something that is important to you. I also love drawing on a definition that I think Brené Brown refers to. And she talks about how the roots of courage actually comes from the Latin word, I think it's cor, but it means heart. That's the really important part, is that courage actually literally comes from the word heart. And so the actions that you're taking, the decisions that you're making are compelled, they're fueled by this love, something that comes from the heart. It's important to you. And so when you think about courage and how it shows up for you in your work, in your personal life, with your family, with your friends, with your kids, your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your partner, these decisions matter. They are so important. And it is important for you to be able to act in courageous ways, even when it's hard. So taking this notion of courage and looking forward, I would invite you, first of all, to look back. And we went through this exercise of looking at things that you're proud of, looking at goals you've accomplished, looking at conversations you've had. And I would ask you to think about the role that courage played in helping you move forward. What role did courage play in some of your biggest gains? What did courage play in some of your scariest moments? I mean, what were some of the conversations that you dreaded the most, or the court applications, or the trials, or the procedural steps on a file? I mean, what did you do in your work that was hard for you, where you really had to summon your courage in order to move forward? Where did you move forward despite feeling scared or nervous or uncomfortable? Where did you decide that you weren't going to let that stop you and you chose to move ahead? And what is it that was on the other side of that? So after you found it within yourself to do these things, what did you find on the other side? Now, when you look forward, having looked back at 2022, having seen the impact or the places where you really had to pull courage from within, what will be required of you to reach your goals in the new year? Maybe it's finding the courage to leave a job where you're happy, where you're established, where you have a reputation, because you know there's something else out there for you that is better for you. It may be courage to ask for opportunities that you want to be a part of. Maybe it's courage to make offers to help others, knowing that they may not want your help or refuse your help. Maybe it's courage to ask for help. Maybe you've been doing it all on your own and it's time to reach out and find the support that you need. Maybe it's the courage to say no. Maybe there's something that you've been doing. It's part of what people expect of you, but this is the year that you're going to start to stop doing that because you want to make room for something else. Or maybe it's the courage to take a break. Sometimes it's hard. The hardest thing is to slow down and to give yourself the space to think, to rest. I know for myself, this is one of those areas where I really struggle. And it's one of those areas where I'm going to have that courage and the discipline to work that time into my schedule more than I've been doing it lately. Now, before we wrap up, still a few more things to cover. Courage does not necessarily feel good. When I was initially scripting this podcast, I was thinking about what we do when we feel courageous. And initially I was thinking, well, of course, we take bold moves, we take decisive action, we forge ahead in the world. But if I'm really thoughtful about what courage truly feels like and the moments where I have exercised the most courage, I don't think those have been the moments where I have actually felt the best. And you might say some of them are the times where I have felt the worst, where I have had conversations where I have asked for something. And as a result, I've had a sleepless night waiting for the answer. And the way that I have found comfort is that I've decided to be the person who is willing to have that discomfort in order to be the person who makes that request. If it's something that is important to me, that I feel is important, I'm willing to have the courage to initiate that conversation, knowing that the price that I'm going to pay is to feel discomfort or physically uncomfortable for some period of time, regardless of the answer to that request. So knowing that courage might not feel very good, you can actually prepare for that. So for me, sometimes if I'm doing something courageous, I might have trouble sleeping. I might feel knots in my stomach. I might worry or have fear around what people are going to say, how they're going to react. I might fear that they're going to think that my idea isn't very good, that the thing that I'm asking for is unreasonable. So if you find that you're about to embark on this courageous venture, and then all of a sudden you feel like this just doesn't feel right in my body, it doesn't feel very good, I would invite you to pause and ask yourself whether you still want to proceed knowing all of that. Now, the flip side is that as much as courage can feel terrible in the moment, in the moments leading up to, or as you execute, or just after, there is a flip side, and it may take a while to get there, but it's the feeling of pride of having done the thing that was really hard for you to do. And the way that that has shown up for me, and the way that it has shown up for lawyers that I have worked with, is that on the other side, there is this sense of integrity. You had a conversation that was really difficult, and whether you got the result you wanted or not, having had that conversation felt like it was honest. It felt like you were in integrity with yourself. The words that you spoke were true for you. And the act of doing that in itself allows you to rest well with that conversation. It allows you to put that event behind you in a way that you feel proud. And as I'm speaking to you, I'm thinking about conversations that I've had with clients where they have had really difficult conversations, whether it's negotiating a raise, whether it's asking not to work with a particular person, client, lawyer because of that relationship, whether it is coming out with something that they have found to be not right within some aspect of a practice that they have been a part of. And so It can be a very difficult conversation. It might be confronting a bully in the workplace, or a difficult conversation you're having with somebody who works for you, where you're having to tell them the truth about something that's really hard. These are all moments where those conversations feel so difficult to have in the moment. But on the other side, whether or not you get the result that you want, you have the peace of knowing that you've actually gone ahead and done the hard thing. And so in hindsight, you get to feel proud. Now, yes, sometimes it's going to take a few days, a few weeks. It might even take months for you to reach that point where that conversation feels good. But I would venture to consider that the feeling that you have, even if it's that short-term discomfort, that the long-term gain is so much more worth it. And if you've ever had that experience where you've had something where you haven't fully addressed it and it goes on, maybe it's one of the resolutions that you had on your list for last year, maybe it's a conversation that you need to have and you let it lapse, in the long run, that is more exhausting. That feels worse than dealing with it in the moment. And the reason that I talk about this, the maybe the shadow side of courage, the difficult side of courage, is that as we embark in 2023 with our big goals, with our big dreams, with the courage that we're bringing to create the impact that we want to create in the world, if it feels uncomfortable, that isn't necessarily a reason that we should not proceed. And in fact, it may be a sign that we are exactly on the right path. So I just want you to know it's okay. You can, as the book says, feel the fear and do it anyways. And going back to that definition of courage, it doesn't mean not having fear. Courage is experiencing that fear and allowing it to be there while you go after what it is that you want to create. And so just again, to reinforce how important I think courage is, I wanted to share a few more examples of situations that I have seen in the past year where I have worked with or been a witness to courageous acts and how inspired I have been. And I want to share that because I think it might be inspiring to you as well. I have seen lawyers who have really taken ownership, who have embraced leadership in a way that was new to them. And sometimes that meant having really difficult, open, frank discussions with a team member that felt uncomfortable, where there were differing views. And that required courage to have those conversations. Sometimes courage means going out and signing a lease on the office that will house your firm. That, again, takes courage. It may be negotiating or asking for a higher salary, even though the amount that you're being offered is, in quotes, enough. It may be showing up at a networking event all by yourself because you're there to meet people. It may be raising your hand and speaking at a meeting, even though you're uncomfortable. It may mean leaving a job that is no longer a good fit for you, even though you're comfortable there, even though you have a reputation, even though the future there is really clear and certain for you. It may mean that you are having a conversation where you're standing up to a bully at work. It may mean having an honest conversation with somebody at your law firm where you tell them that the practice area that you've been in is no longer aligned for you, is not a good fit, knowing that it might mean that there's no longer a place for you in that organization. And finally, it might be having a conversation with yourself where you're honest with what it is that you truly want. And these are all examples of areas or acts or conversations where lawyers that I have worked with have had the courage to make a courageous move. Sorry to use courage twice in one sentence, but you know what I mean. And the follow-on to so many of those acts is that when you take the courageous step, the net appears. So you have that conversation with your team as a leader, and your team comes to a resolution, a better way of doing things. It may mean you have that conversation at your firm where you request that position that doesn't yet exist, and they find a way to create that position for you. Or you leave that organization, that firm that you've been at for years, and you find that you're able to situate yourself in a better working environment that's more aligned with who you are. So what I see for all of you in the coming year is more confidence as you gain clarity over what you want and what you don't want. I see you advocating for yourself, however that feels most aligned for you. Notice I didn't say comfortable, aligned. And I think it also means letting go of strategies, habits, practices that maybe helped you get to the place you are now, but that maybe don't belong in the place that you are going. Let us together make 2023 a year of courageous action. I want this to be a year for all of us that tips the balance toward bold, courageous steps. And I can't wait to see what results we create, what impact that leads to in 2023. So for all of you, thank you again for joining me for this podcast episode. Thank you for joining me in this podcast over the course of the year. And for all of you who would like additional support, please reach out to me, whether it is for one-to-one coaching or if there is still room, I would love for you to join me in my group coaching and mastermind program. It is going to be such a wonderful space for those of you who choose to participate to create something extraordinary this year. Thank you again for all of your support. Happy New Year to all of you. I can't wait to reconnect in 2023. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.